How do we know that a star works by Kiddushin? We know Kesef, Bia. How do we know that star works by Kiddushin? Kesef, star, and Bia. Smart says a Kava Chomer. Umakef, Seshain Motzi Machnish, star, Shemotzi, and Udin Shemaz. It's obvious. Kesef, which can't be used for Gerushin, we know it could still be used for Kiddushin. Obviously, a star, which can be used for Gerushin, can be used for Kiddushin as well. Malakes, which came Podim Bohak Deshim Maisav Sheni, Tomar star, Sheni Podim Bohak Deshim Maisav Sheni. You can't compare it to Kesef because the Maisa, Kesef is stronger. Maybe Kesef can be Makdish because Kesef, you can be Poda with it. Hekdesh and Meiser Sheni. You can redeem Hekdesh and Meiser Sheni with Kesef, which you can't do with star. As Rashi explains, you can't give somebody a star and say, okay, with this star, now the money or the Hekdesh from the Meiser Sheni or the Hekdesh, the holiness is going to go onto the star. That just doesn't work. Therefore, maybe star should not be able to be used for Kiddushin. That's how you see that you have to give Kesef in order to be Pod to Hekdesh and Meiser Sheni. Amar Kravi Yatsa V'Haisa. No, you want to know how you know that you can use a star for Kiddushin is because of the Yotza V'Haisa. Makish Havaya Liyatzia. Ma Yitzia B'Shtar, Af Havaya Nami B'Shtar. Based on the pasuk, Yotza V'Haisa, that the way you come in is the way you go out, just like you go out with a star, you come in with a star. V'Akish Nami Yitzia L'Havaya Ma Havaya B'Kesef, Af Yitzia B'Kesef. So then the Gemara says, okay, you want to be smart, you want to play the game, I'll play the game. So if you're telling me that a star can go in because it can go out, then Kesef, which can go in, should be able to go out. Very interesting. Again, star can go out, used for Gerushin, it should be able to come in for Kiddushin. So now I'll say the opposite. Then Kesef, which could be used to come in, should be used to be able to go out. And we know that Kesef can't be used to divorce somebody. Rabbi, no, Yomru Kesef Machnes Kesef Motzi Sanego Yasek Ategar. It wouldn't work if you use Kesef for both coming in and going out, because then you're using the same thing for the Sanegor and the Kategor. Says the Gemara, Hachi Star Nami Yomu Star Motzi Star Machnes Kategor Yasa Sanegor. Says you want to play a game, so I'll tell you the same thing. You tell me I can't use Kesef to go in and go out because it's not right to use the same thing for Kiddushin and for Gerushin. The Mai said, why is it okay then to use the same thing for Gerushin and Kiddushin when you're using a star? Says the Gemara, no. Mile Dai Star Lechud and Mile Dai Star Lechud. When you use a star, so one of them is a ksuva and one of them is a star gerushin, one of them is a get. So it's a different star, but the coin is the same coin. It might not be physically the same exact coin, but a quarter is a quarter is a quarter. The same quarter you're using for this is the same quarter or dollar you're using for this one. The imprint, as Rashi says, is the same. Therefore, it's inappropriate to use the same exact coin for Kiddushin and for Erizin. So once it's using for Kiddushin, you can't use it, for Gittin. It's one imprint, and therefore, you can use the same kesef for Kiddushin and for Gerushin, but you can use a star for Gerushin and for Kiddushin. Again, not the same star. One of them is a get, one of them is a ksuva, but there's no problem with using a star for both. But if I ask you, according to Aryai, why is it? Well, it's not really according to BAYT, but why is it, or according to this opinion, why is it that you can go ahead and you can use a star? So you can use a star because at the end of the day, the Kiddushin can be done with a star because of the Yatsa V'Haisa. Rav Amar, so Rav says, what's the problem with Havaya B'Kesef Af Yitzia Nami B'Kesef? So Amar Kra V'Chasav La B'Chisa B'Chsiva Miskaresh V'In Miskaresh B'Kesef. Again, everybody agrees that V'Yatsa V'Haisa, the reason you can go ahead and you can use a star for Kiddushin, which is what we're looking for the source of, is because just like you can use it for going out, you can use it for coming in. From the pasuk V'Yatsa V'Haisa, the going out should be the same as coming in. Then the Gemara's question was, okay, so then why don't we say the same thing by Kesef? So Aryai answered, we don't say the same thing by Kesef because it's not right to use the same coin, the same imprint for both. By star, that's not an issue because it's a different star. Rabbi gives another answer why we can't say the same thing by Kesef. Why don't we say by Kesef? Again, we already established Kesef can be used for Kiddushin, so why don't we just say, just like Yitziyasa, just like we say V'Yatsa V'Haisa, we should be able to use the Kesef for V'Yatsa as well, just like it was used for V'Haisa to come in. Rava says, Amar Kra V'Chasav La. No, it's another pasuk. You're right, it says V'Yatsa V'Haisa. The way that Rava seems to mean to me, because again, Aryai was Svara, shouldn't use the same thing. Rava seems to be saying there's another pasuk that like outdoes V'Yatsa V'Haisa. What's that pasuk? V'Chasav La Sefer Krisus. You're right, it's Sefer Krisus by get. How does that exclude Kesef? Says Gemara, B'Chsiva Miskareshes Ve'ina Miskareshes B'Kesef. Because V'Chasav La Sefer Krisus means you only a Sefer Krisus, only a get can go ahead and be miskareshes, not kesef. Says the Gemara, maybe when it says v'chasala sefer krisus, don't say it means a star versus kesef. It means v'chasala sefer krisus. You can use a star only for gerushin, but you can't use a star for kiddushin. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Because it says v'yatzav haisa, so we know that you can use a star for kiddushin from v'yatzav haisa. So you can use a star for gerushin and you can use it for kiddushin. So what must it be excluding when it says you should use v'chasav la sefer krisus, that you should write a star for gerushin? It must be excluding. You can't be excluding star for kiddushin because v'yatzav haisa. It must be excluding kasef for gerushin. So it says Gemara mara isa mistaber. This makes sense in svara too, that you would be excluding the sefer krisus, v'chasav la sefer krisus. That would be excluding get. That would be excluding kesef. I'm sorry. Why? Kai begerushin b'may gerushin, kai begerushin b'may kiddushin. Because if you're saying v'chasav la sefer krisus, you can use a star for gerushin. It makes sense. If I'm talking about gerushin, it would make sense that means to exclude something else from being used for gerushin. V'chasav la sefer krisus. The way you want to learn is what? You can use a star for gerushin, but you can use a star for kiddushin. That doesn't make sense, because again, v'chazal segud is talking about the parsha of gerushin. If you're going to say that it's including something, i.e. a star in gerushin, it should be excluding something in gerushin as well. What's it excluding in gerushin? It's excluding kesef in gerushin. And therefore, again, v'yatzav v'haisa teaches me that a star can be used not only for gerushin, which is a given, but for kiddushin as well. And that was our original question. Minayin af bekiddushin, v'yatzav v'haisa. Why can't I then, if I know that a kesef can be used for kiddushin, which you already improve, so now prove the other way. Now, kesef should be able to use for gerushin. Can't be used for gerushin because you can't use the same thing for both. Star is not a problem; it's a different star. Or according to the second thing, you have a separate exclusion v'chasav la. It needs to be dafka sefer krisus with a star, and it can't be kiddushin to do. It can't be kesef to do gerushin. Rabbi Yosef Glili the Afik Leila Haikra L'Drasha Achrina. Rabbi Yosef Glili, who uses v'chasav la sefer krisus for a different drasha, therefore he can't use it to exclude kesef. How does he know that kesef is excluded from gerushin? She'ena miskareshes b'kesef minalei. Amarkra sefer krisus. Only a sefer's korsa v'ein davar acher korsa. Only a sefer can go ahead. A star can go ahead and do gerushin, and not something else. V'Rabbanan hai krisus my abdilei. So what do Rabbanan do with krisus? Again, because sefer korta, he seems to be saying sefer krisus is that it's something that's a sefer, which is krisus. Rabbanan hai krisus my abdilei mi bayale ledavar akores beino lebeina. It sounds like Rabbi Yosef Glili is concentrating on the first part, sefer krisus, and nothing else. For Rabbanan, what are they going to do with sefer krisus? Because again, they already know if he's using sefer krisus to exclude kesef, but the Rabbanan already know that from v'chasav la, which Rabbi Yosef Glili used for something else. So what are the Rabbanan going to do with the words with sefer krisus? They're not going to concentrate on the word sefer. They're going to concentrate on the word krisus. Hai krisus my abdilei, because again it could have said sefer kares instead of sefer kares, sefer krisus my abdilei. Mi bayile ledavar akores beino lebeina. They learn that when you give a star, as opposed to kesef, which they already know elsewhere, the star needs to be a star that's going to be totally cut off the marriage. What does it mean to totally cut it off? That means it can't be on condition. What does that mean? Kiddutanya. This is your get on condition that you never go to your father's house and never drink wine. That doesn't work. Ein zekrisis, because what are you going to say? She's going to be not divorced to you because at the end of the day she might end up coming and drinking wine. Kol shloshim yom, if you say that it's not going to take effect, it's only going to take effect on condition that you don't drink for 30 days. Harei zekrisis. At the end of 30 days, if she didn't end up drinking, she didn't go to her father's house, so then harei zekrisis. For Rabbi Yosef Glili, so Rabbi Yosef Glili, what is he going to learn? Rabbi Yosef Glili, mikares krisus kanafgile. He learns from the fact that it says not krisus. Again, Rabbanan learned from the fact that it says sefer krisus in general, the word krisus. Rabbi Yosef Glili says mikares krisus kanafgile. He learned the fact that it says krisus and not kares. Rabbanan kares krisus lo mashmalhu. They don't learn anything from kares krisus. So it comes out over here again that we asked in the beginning of the Gemara, how do you know that you could do kiddushin b'shtar? We said you could do kiddushin b'shtar. We know that you could do kiddushin. We know that you could do gerushin b'shtar. So once you could do gerushin b'shtar, you could do kiddushin b'shtar as well because of v'yatza v'haisa. Then we asked l'maisa, if it's true that you're teaching me v'yatza v'haisa to teach me that kiddushin works by shtar, then you should use the same svara v'yatza v'haisa saying that gerushin is equal to kiddushin. Then you should use it for kesef as well. With the other way, that kiddushin, we know that kesef can be used for kiddushin already. So now v'yatza v'haisa should teach me that kesef should be able to be used for gerushin. We gave two answers. Aryai says no, kesef can't be used for gerushin because the Maisa it's not right to use the same thing. What about shtar? Shtar is separate. Shtar is a separate document. Kesef is the same exact coin, even though it's not literally the same coin you're going to use for both, but it's the same imprint and everything. And Rabbi says another reason. The reason you can't use kesef for gerushin is because it says v'chasav la sefer krisus. You have to write dafka sefer krisus, not something else. And then we had a few other learnings as on the side. Says the Gemara. Now that you have kesef, shtar, and bia, Now we're going to ask the obvious question, and the question that's asked by Baba Kama in a separate context, right, is why do you need all three? Teach me two and I'll learn. So chada michada lo asa. We already know why we can't do one from one. Tisi tachada mitarte. Teach me two of the three and I'll learn the third one. Why? Hi Tisi. Which two do you want me to teach? Lo lichta rachmana b'shtar. Just tell me an isha is mikudeshes b'kesef uveviya, and then I'll know v'tisi mehanach. So I'll know star. If I tell me kesef and bia, I'll know star. Why? It says the Gemara malahanach. You can't learn star from Kesef and Bia because by Kesef and Bia she gets some type of hana. By star, there's no hana in getting a piece of paper. Lo nichtav rachmana bia v'tisi mehanach. So right, Kesef and star and no right bia and I'll know. Malana shekain kinyana and meruba. You can't learn bia because Kesef and star you can go and use it for other things. Kesef and star you can use to go ahead and buy avadim, to buy karka. By bia you can't buy anything with bia. Lo nichtav rachmana b'kesef v'tisi mehanach. Don't write Kesef and just write star and bia, and we'll learn Kesef from star and bia. I can't. Malana shekain yeshnon be'al korcha. Very interestingly, star and bia can be used against somebody's will. Where can star be used against somebody's will? By gerushin. Where can bia be used against somebody's will? By yibum. By kesef, you can't be used against somebody's will, so we can't learn anything. We can't learn kesef from star and bia for kiddushin. V'chitema kesef nami ba'al korcha ba'mevira. I'll say, oh no, there is a case where kesef can be used against somebody's will. We know that a father can sell his underage daughter to an amma as an amma ivriya. So you see that kesef can be used ba'al korcha. Says Gemara, be'ishus mi'alo ashcha. No, we're not talking about any case in the world. We're talking about cases of ishus, cases of marriage or divorce. We see that bia can be used b'al korcha for hibum, and star can be used b'al korcha of a woman for gittin, but kesef nowhere in halacha by ishus, by marriage or divorce, can it be used b'al korcha, and therefore you need all three, kesef, star, and bia with the appropriate sources. Zok the Gemara. Amar Rafuna. Rafuna says, besides for kesef, star, and bia, I'm going to give you a fourth way that you could be kona a woman for kiddushin. How's that? Chuppah. Chuppah kona mikama choma. Now, our chuppah that we do is not the chuppah that we're talking about here, Kiddushin. We do Aryai mekudesh asli b'tabazu. The chuppah that we have is for Nesuin, and we're going to see in the Gemara. The Gemara learns for sure that chuppah works for Nesuin. The question is, does chuppah work for Kiddushin as well? That means, do we not have to give the ring under the chuppah? Maybe chuppah can function as the Kiddushin, and then chuppah can function as the Nesuin afterwards as well. Says Rafuna, chuppah can be both. Chuppah can actually work for the Kiddushin as well. Where do we see this?
In those days, they have chuppah involved?
Seemingly not. Seemingly, because again, they were mikudeshes a year before, so they would give the bia, the star, the kesef, and then they would go ahead and they would have the chuppah for the nisuin. But he's saying, if you wanted to, if you don't want to give the kesef, star, or bia, you can actually do chuppah for the kiddushin as well. Uma kesef. So says the Gemara, we learn it from a kava chomer. How do you know that chuppah works? Uma kesef sheino machil b'truma kona, because we know kesef. When you do kiddushin with kesef, it doesn't give her the ability to eat truma. She can only eat truma when she's actually married to the guy, not when she just goes and is mekadesh to the guy. These kavachomers are going to be very interesting because it's like the Gemara is like reaching far, because what's it saying? It's saying kesef, which works for kiddushin, and yet it doesn't enable her to eat truma. So then for sure chuppah, which enables her to eat truma when? By nisuin, so for sure it should work by kiddushin as well. That's the Gemara's kavachomer. Again, it doesn't sound right, but it's just, look at it from the outside. You have this thing called kesef, and Lamaisa, the thing called kesef can work for kiddushin, but it doesn't enable her to eat truma. And at the same token, the thing called chuppah in another context enables her to eat truma. So kavachomer, it should work to enable her to be able to do kiddushin with. Again, if you think about it, so it makes sense. The way the Gemara is playing, it's like, at first glance, it's like weird, but the thing called kesef enables kiddushin, doesn't enable to eat truma. So kavachomer, this thing called chuppah, which enables to eat truma, i.e. through nisuin, enables to be able to do kiddushin with it as well. Says the Gemara, v'chesef eino machil. Whoa, it's not true that kesef doesn't enable to eat. Really, mitzad hadin, when you're mekudesh somebody with kesef, you're allowed to eat truma. So why don't we let somebody eat truma? Says the Gemara, Devar Torah, v'amar ula Devar Torah arusa b'Yisrael ochelas b'truma. And again, once you prove that min hadin, a woman can eat truma even with kesef kiddushin, then you have no kavachomer. Because again, the whole kavachomer is based on the fact that she can eat by kesef kiddushin, and yet kesef is mekadesh. So then chuppah, which lets her eat, for sure should be able to be mekadesh. But if kesef itself can also enable her to eat truma, then you have no kavachomer. Then what's the kavachomer? vachomer to chuppah. Where do we see that kesef can actually let her eat? Shenamar, as it says, v'kohen ki yikna nefesh kinyan kaspo v'hakinyan kaspehu. Says the Gemara, so what do you mean? But we know lemaisa that a woman who is mekudash to a man with kesef cannot eat truma. Umatam amurin ochelas. No, that's only dirabanan. Gezerah shema yimzegu lakos bebeis aviyah v'tishkenu la'acheha v'lachoseh. This idea you've heard before, that min hadin, a woman who's engaged to somebody, mekudeshes to somebody, she's allowed to eat truma. The rabbi said she can't eat truma. Why not? Because we know when you go to the mechutanim's house after you're engaged, what do? You bring home, I don't know who does this, but you bring home some extra food. You bring home the food to your parents' house. All of a sudden, you can eat it theoretically because you're engaged to the Kohen. You bring it to the parents' house, and your parents are not Kohanim, they're Leviim, they're Yisraelim, and they can't eat it. And your brothers are going to want to eat it. They're going to want the leftovers. You're going to have the cookies. You're going to put in the thing, and they're going to eat truma tomorrow morning. But min hadin, kesef works to enable the girl to go ahead and eat truma after she is mekudash to the guy. And therefore, you have no kal vachomer to teach me that chuppah can be koneh by kiddushin as well. So now you got to give me another thing. Elaparechachi. What's the kal vachomer? Here's the kal vachomer. Uma kesef sheino gomer koneh. Now listen to this again. It's very medakistic. What does he say here? Kesef eino gomer is koneh. Kesef, when it does work for Kiddushin, but we know that Kiddushin, what happens by Kiddushin? You stay by your father's house. The husband-to-be doesn't get your Ma'aseh Yadeh. If you're working, so he only gets your money after you're married, not after the Kiddushin. So Kesef enables Kiddushin, but doesn't enable the woman, or doesn't enable the man to collect the woman's Ma'aseh Yadeh, or to inherit her in case she dies. Chuppah shegomeres, Chuppah, which actually has the ability to go ahead and cause her Ma'aseh Yadeh and her Yerusha to go to the husband when, under the circumstances of nisuin, chuppah shegomeres eino din shetikna. Again, we're trying to prove that chuppah should work not only for nisuin, which is a given, but for kiddushin as well. So chuppah, which enables the Ma'aseh Yadeh and the Yerusha to go to him after it's used for nisuin, so for sure it should be able to go ahead and be used for kiddushin as well. Says the Gemara, no, but I'll show to you that there's something about kesef, which makes it stronger than chuppah. And again, once you have kesef stronger than chuppah, like we've had many times, once you show me that there's one aspect of kesef that's stronger, then I can argue, yes, there is a case of chuppah gomeres and kesef eino gomeres, but at the end of the day, we also see that kesef is stronger. Maybe the reason that kesef can be mekadesh is because of this strength. What's the strength? Mala kesef shekin podin bo hekdesho sumaiser sheni. Maybe chuppah, which you can't be poda, there's nothing to be poda, maiser sheni and hekdesh with a chuppah. So chuppah, which is not able to be used to be makdish, to be poda makdish and mesheni, maybe it shouldn't work. And this is where the Gemara gets into the whole thing, where if you could prove that one of the other acceptable ways of kiddushin don't fit this category, then this can't be the exception. Again, if you can prove that all of them have one strength to them that chuppah doesn't have, then you can throw chuppah out the window. But as we're going to see in the Gemara, they're going to bring strengths of individual ones, but then they're going to say that can't be a criteria, that can't be a prerequisite, because one of the other two aspects of kiddushin actually don't have that strength. And when you can prove that one of the other two don't have it, then it can't by definition be a prerequisite. So the Gemara is suggesting at this point maybe a prerequisite to doing kiddushin is the fact that it can be used to be poda hekdesh and meiser sheni, which chuppah doesn't have, and then it can't be used for a kiddushin. Says the Gemara, bia tochiach, but that can't be a prerequisite because bia can't be used to be poda hekdesh and meiser sheni, and we just proved that it can be used for kiddushin. Mala bia sheken kona biyavama. Then you're going to say, well, you can't bring in bia because you could be kona with a yavama, but kesef yochiach. We know that kesef can't be used to be kona yavama. V'chazar din lo rizev v'lukerizev v'lo rizeh kerizeh. Again, hatzada sheveshem. What's the least common or most common denominator? Shekonin ba'alma v'konin kan. Just like kesef, shtar, and bia can be kona with other things. They can be kona. Kesef can be kona. As we mentioned, kesef works, we'll get to in a second. Kesef can be kona avadim and shvachos, shtar can be kona avadim and shvachos, avadim and land, and bia can be kona yivama. So too, it can be kona over here by kiddushin. Afani avi chuppah shekona be'alma. Where's chuppah kona somewhere else? By nisuin. So too, v'kona kan. Therefore, chuppah can be used for kiddushin as well. That's the least common. I always forget least common or most common denominator, whichever one. That's the most common denominator, least common denominator between all of them. They all have something in common that they can be kona somewhere else. Kesef, shtar, and bia can be kona somewhere else. Therefore, they can be kona by kiddushin as well. And then also chuppah, which can be kona somewhere else, i.e., by nisuin, can be kona and work for kiddushin as well. Says Gemara, malat tzadashoshem sheken hanasan beruma shtar yochiach. If you say, yeah, but wait, no, we should exclude chuppah because the other three have hanasan meruba, where she gets hana. That's not true because a shtar yochiach, by shtar she doesn't get any hana, and it still works for kiddushin. Malat shtar sheken motzi bebatz yisrael kesef bia yochiach. If you say that shtar should work, yeah, but shtar you can't bring a proof because it's different, because that one works by gittin. Says no, kesef ubiyah don't work by gittin, and they still work by kiddushin. V'chazar din lo rizeh v'lo rizeh. So it's very interesting. If I ask you right now, at the end of the day, where we're standing in the Gemara, why does chuppah work by kiddushin? Originally, we tried to bring a kavachomer from kesef, which we rejected. At the end of the day, we tried to bring all these kavachomers, and we said, what's the reason that chuppah works by kiddushin? Because of a sad hashavah shebehen. Just like kesef, shtar, and bia, which we've already proven elsewhere work, and they're able to be kona in other places, and they're able to be kona by kiddushin as well. So too, if I ask you what's the reason, Lamaisa, the reason that by shtar it works by kiddushin is since it could be kona by nesuin, it could be kona by kiddushin as well. Says the Gemara as well, but how can you bring the tzad hashaveh? They all can be used by al korcha. Says Rav Huna, no, for Rav Huna, the one who says over here that chuppah is going to work, would hold kesef miya b'ishus lo ashram b'al korcha. I already told you, he said, kesef doesn't work b'ishus b'al korcha. Yeah, you brought me a case of amma ivriya, but it doesn't work b'ishus b'al korcha. Therefore, the fact that something works b'al korcha by ishus cannot be a prerequisite to be used to say in order for it to be able to use for kiddushin, it needs to be worked by al korcha by kiddushin, because it's not true. Because kesef can't be used by al korcha, nevertheless it can be used for kiddushin, and therefore again we're back to square. Well, not back to square one. We answered our question. Kesef chuppah by kiddushin. Where do we know? Since it could be used for something else, i.e. nisuin, it can be used for kiddushin as well. All glot. Says the Gemara. Amar Rava shtei tshuvos bedavar. Even though it says chuvos, it means questions. I'm going to ask you two questions. Now that you've established everything we've said today, we've tried to make very glot. So now that we've made it glot, that chuppah can be used not only for nisuim, which was a given before today, it can be used for kiddushin as well. Now we're going to have two questions on Rav Huna, who says that it can be used for kiddushin. First of all, chada, d'shalosh tanan v'dalil lo tanan. First of all, the Mishnah says that there are three ways to go ahead and be Mekadesh and Isha. Now, all of a sudden, you're waking up and saying, whoa, Mishnah's wrong. Really, it's four. Chuppah as well. Tana, says in Gemara v'od, klum chuppah gomeres al yidei kiddushin, v'chi gamrinan chuppah shlo yidei kiddushin, me chuppah shal yidei kiddushin. Now, this is really the question that was underlying my problem the whole time. Think about it for a second. I made it all sound very nice. But as Rashi explains, at the end of the day, what are you doing here? You're saying that chuppah works by nisuin, so it should work by kiddushin as well. So you were shaking your head before. Why? Because if you think about it for a second, the fact that chuppah works by nisuin, maybe it only works by nisuin because it already has step one. What was step one? Kesef, shtar, or bia. So maybe chuppah is not that strong to work by kiddushin. Maybe kesef, shtar, and bia work by kiddushin even without something coming before it. But nisuin, the fact that it works, the fact that chuppah works by nisuin, maybe that's only because it already has like the starter. It already has something pushing it, i.e. kesef, shtar, or bia. But how can you prove that just because chuppah works by nisuin, it should work by kiddushin as well? Maybe it only works by nisuin because the kesef, shtar, bia came first. But who said that chuppah should work by kiddushin, and therefore you'll end up having chuppah by kiddushin and chuppah by nisuin? Maybe the chuppah by nisuin, the whole power of chuppah by nisuin, which you're learning from to teach chuppah by kiddushin, the whole power of chuppah by nisuin only comes from kesef, shtar, or bia. And if you would in fact have chuppah by kiddushin, maybe chuppah by nisuin would in fact work. That's what the Gemara says. So there's a problem with the words in the Mishnah, and there's a problem, the Gemara says, with the logic. Amar le Abaye, I'll answer both questions. That's an easy one. Tana milsa de chsiva behedya ktani, milsa de lo chsiva behedya lo kitani. The ones that are written straight in the Torah, kesef, shtar, and bia, all have psukim, that's what the Mishnah meant. It doesn't mean only three ways, there are four ways. There are three that are obvious based on the Torah, kesef, shtar, bia. Chuppah, which is not so obvious, the Mishnah didn't list. Udika amar klum chuppah gomeres al yidei kiddushin, Rav Huna nami haki kamar. Rav Huna says the following. Uma kesef she'eno gomer achar kesef koneh. Chuppah shegomeres achar kesef eino din shetikna. So he says you're right. Just to use nisuin as a standalone is going to be a problem, because maybe to use nisuin and say, oh, chuppah works by nisuin, it should work by kiddushin as well. Maybe it only works by nisuin because of the power. So you have to give me a kal v'chomer. What kal v'chomer can we come up with? So I have a perfect kal v'chomer for you. The kal v'chomer is that we know that kesef doesn't work after kiddushin. That means if you do kesef kiddushin, so then we know that what? We know that kesef will not work for the nisuin. So kesef is only strong enough to do kiddushin, but not nisuin. Says the Gemara, chuppah shegomeres achar kesef. But we know that chuppah is strong enough to go ahead and do Nisuin after Kesef. That means if you have Kesef as Kiddushin, so now if you want to say, is Kesef for Nisuin going to be strong enough? No. Kesef is not strong enough to go ahead and close the deal. Kesef could do the Kiddushin, but it's not strong enough to close the deal and do the Nisuin. Now, Chuppah, which is strong enough to close the deal when you were Mekadesh B'Kesef, it's strong enough to close the deal. That shows that there's something stronger about chuppah than there is about kesef, because kesef can't close the deal. Kesef can do the kedushin, but it can't close the deal and do the nisuin. Then chuppah, which can close the deal when you did kedushin with kesef, obviously should be able to be in replacement of the original kesef for the kedushin. So that's what the Gemara ends up with the kal vachomer. So again, either you learn that tzad hashava shebehen, that the reason that chuppah can be used for kedushin is because it's tzad hashava shebehen, just like it could be koneh by nisuin, it could be koneh by kedushin. The Gemara says that's not so glot. So the Gemara says, no, I'll give you a real kal vachomer to work with. Kesef works for kedushin, but it's not strong enough to work for nisuin. Clearly, chuppah, which is strong enough to work for nisuin when it's following kesef, should definitely be strong enough to actually act as the kedushin, as the kesef itself. That's a kal vachomer the Gemara ends up with to prove that chuppah, according to Afuna, can be used for kedushin. Zok the Gemara. Tani Rabbanan. Should slow down. We don't have too much time. Keitzad bekesef. How do you end up being mekadesh somebody with kesef? Nasan la kesef or shava kesef yamalazu say under the chuppah harayad mekudeshes li harayad meureses li harayad li leintu. Now you never hear this under the chuppah. You have a guy who learns kedushin. He wants to be a wise guy. So next chuppah you go to, instead of saying harayad mekudeshes li, he can say harayad li leintu, and it will work. Raizel mekudeshes. Aval hisha not naver amrahi. She gives him the money, and she says to him, Hareini mekudeshes lach. I am mekudesh to you. Hareini mureses lach. Hareini lach leintu eina mekudeshes. He needs to give the money, and he needs to say, Harei at mekudeshes li. You are mekudesh to me. She can say, Hareini mekudeshes lach. Yes, there are women who give rings under the chuppah, but it has no halachic standing. Maskiv la Rav Papa. Rav Papa makes a very interesting diuk from the thing. He says if you read the Reisha and you read the Sefer, you get mixed messages. Why? Because in the Reisha, it sounds like, why does it work? Because he gave the kesef and he said Hareya Mikudeshes li. Hanasan hu ve'amra hi eina Mikudeshes. Now, if she gave and she said, it doesn't work for sure. But it implies that it has to be dafka he gave and he said. The Reisha implies that if he gave but she said, Hareini Mikudeshes lecha, even if he gave, it will not be Mikudesh. But what does the Sefer imply? Ema Sefer. If she gave and she said it's not Kiddushin, what does that imply? It's because she did both. The Sefer implies Hanasan who, if he gave the money, but V'amrahi have Kiddushin. If she speaks, so then it is a Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, no. Reisha Dafka Seifa Kedei Nasva. No, the Reisha is Dafka. That means it only works if he gives and he says. The Seifa is Kedei Nasva. It's just incidentally. Says Gemara, it's ridiculous. V'tani Seifa Mielsa the Starle L'Reisha. Okay, it's one thing to just say something incidentally and not be so careful of your words, but to say something incidentally and contradict based on the implication, the Reisha, that's hard to hear. Elahachi Kamar Nasan Hu ve'Amar Hu Pshita Dahave Kiddushin. If he gives and he says and it's Pasha that is Kiddushin. Nasan Hu ve'Amrahi. And if he gives and she says, Nasa Kemisha, not Nahi Amrahi V'lo Have Kiddushin. If he gives, but she says you might have thought it's good, it's saying no, it's comparable to a she giving and she saying, in which case it will not be Kiddushin. So again, it doesn't work unless he says and he gives. Nasan Hu V'Amrahu Ha Mikudeshes. Nas Nahi V'Amrahi Eina Mikudeshes. So what's the implication of Nasan Hu V'Amrahi might be good? No. Nasan Hu V'Amrahi, it's interesting according to this. Sveikahi V'Chayshina Midirabanan. He says it's not so pasha that, right? According to the first answer, if he gives, for sure he needs to give. But if he gives and she speaks, Hareini Mikudeshes lach, so according to the first answer, it's nothing. Just like if she gave and she spoke. But according to the second answer, if he gives and she speaks, so it's actually a suffix, v'chayshinan midrabanan. What does it mean, a suffix in chayshinan midrabanan? Look at Rashi, v'chayshinan midrabanan on top. She'im ba'acher v'kitsha, if somebody else is mekadesh or sricha get mishnehem. She needs a get from both of them. Why? Shema lo hayu shel arishon kiddushin v'chalu kiddushay sheni. Because maybe at one hand, right, if it's a savei kiddushin over here in this first case, and now she goes in and she's mekadesh somebody else and does it tareini mekudeshli with the whole way 100% right. So now if she's married or she's mekadesh to the first guy, then the second one's not chal. But if she wasn't mekadesh to the first guy because it doesn't work, so then the second one is chal. So if she's mekadesh to a second one, she can't remain married to him because maybe she's mekadesh to the first one, and vice versa. So therefore, don't try this at home, because if you do this at home and then you go in and you're mekadesh somebody else, and if you're going to do it at home, so then at least be mekadesh to the guy the right way afterwards. But if you do this lashon where he gives the money, but she says hareini mikudeshes lach, so at the end of the day it's going to be a safek kiddushin if she goes in and she's mekadesh somebody else in the 100% regular way. So then she's going to have to get divorced from both of them, because again she might be married to the one, might be married to number two. That's what the Gemara says. Amar Shmuel, BAYT by kiddushin nasan la kesef v'shava kesef amar la hareya mikudeshes hareya mureset harei at leintu harezo mikudeshes. So what's Shmuel adding? So Rashi points out that Shmuel is saying hareya mikudeshes without saying li. Hareya mekudeshes, we'll see in the Gemara in a second, without saying li, it still works. Hareya mekudeshes, because of what do you mean? Who else are you mekudesh to? I'm standing right here. Says the Gemara, Hareya mekudeshes. Hareini isheich, hareini baalech, hareini aruseich. Not that you're mekudeshes, or mekudeshes li. It's I am your husband, I am your aruseich, ein kan beis mechush. Then it doesn't work at all. Because again, it has to be that you, harei at mekudeshes li. The woman needs to be mekadesh to the man. Not that I become your husband. Says the Gemara, by gerushin as well. V'chein begerushin nasan lava amar la haread mishuleches. You're free. Haread migureshes. Haread muteres achol adam. Harezim migureshes. If you say eini isheich, eini baalech, not that you're free, I am no longer your husband, that doesn't work. Ein kan beis mechush. Amalei rapapa labai. That's what Shmuel says. You have to say haread mikudeshes or haread migureshet, but not hareini baalech or hare or eini isheich. Says the Gemara, Amalei rapapa labai lemeimer desavar Shmuel yadayim shein mochichos having yadayim. Let's go back to the Reisha for a second. The Gemara makes an implication that when Shmuel says harei at mikudeshes, so he didn't say harei at mikudeshet li, it still works. Says the Gemara, that seems to be very ambiguous. When he says Hareya Mekudeshes, you're engaged, it could be to anybody. The Gemara understands that Hareya Mekudeshes, Shmuel understands when I say Hareya Mekudeshes to a woman, and I'm standing here and she's standing there, and we have 500 people in the audience, so it's obvious that I'm not saying Hareya Mekudeshes to Joe Shmo. It's obvious that we understand, even though the language is ambiguous, we understand Hareya Mekudeshes means Hareya Mekudeshes li. But is that true? Because we see that Shmuel in other places says that ambiguous language doesn't work. Where do we see that Shmuel holds that ambiguous language doesn't work? Ve'atnana Omer ehei Harei Nazir. According to the Tanakam, if somebody says, hey, yeah, I will be. What is it? I will be. I will be a Nazir, and he becomes a Nazir automatically, even though he's ambiguous. The Tanakam holds he becomes a Nazir. Ravinamba v'dilma ahei betanis ka'amar. So the Gemara asks, but maybe when he says, yeah, I will be, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be a Nazir. I'm going to fast. I'm going to do this. I'm going to become president of the United States. Whatever it's going to be. Says the Gemara, v'amar Shmuel, no. V'hu Nazir over lefanav. Shmuel says you're right. That if you have language that's ambiguous, it's not going to work. Why does it when he says yeah, I will be, why does that work? Says Shmuel, because the case here is where the Nazir is passing by, you're passing by, and you say, I will be. What is it obvious? It's not ambiguous. It's obvious that I want to be like you who's a Nazir. But you're right, in general, ambiguous language doesn't work. So this is an interesting question, because over here, the Gemara seems to be saying that Harei ad mikudeshet is ambiguous language, and Shmuel is letting it work. So I would say to Shmuel, what are you talking about? The man is standing right in front of her. So it sounds like Shmuel is learning that it's not necessarily just the man in front of her. So you have 5 men in front of her. One of them says Harei ad mikudeshet, but it's not obvious. Because again, if it was obvious that I was the only man there, then Shmuel would agree, just like by the case of the Nazir. The way that I understand it, you have 5 men, 100 men at the wedding, and you say Hareya Mikudeshet, seemingly according to Shmuel, unless it's obvious, like there's a Nazir passing by, yeah, so then it's not going to work. So why over here, when you just say Hareya Mikudeshet without saying li, would it work according to Shmuel? Says the Gemara, you're right. Halav achilo, hachamayaskinan da amar li, you're right. Shmuel says that it works when you say Hareya Mikudeshet li. What's the obvious question? Shmuel Shkaya, thank you so much. It's like me getting up in front of the base measures and saying, I want to teach you halacha. Hareya Mikudeshet li, that works. Shmuel, thank thank you. We actually know that for 3,000 years. So what are you teaching me? If that's really what Shmuel is saying, because you're right, ambiguous language doesn't work, as we see by Nazir. So when Shmuel says Aryai Mekudeshet, it means that the guy said Aryai Mekudeshet li. Shmuel Shkaya, thank you for the teaching. Says the Gemara, no. Hani lishni basrai kamashmalan. You're right. We don't need Shmuel to teach us that when you say Aryai Mekudeshet li, Hareza Mekudeshet. You don't need Shmuel to teach me Aryai Mishulachet that you're Megureshet. What do you need? You need him to teach when I say Hareini Isheich, Hareini Baalech, Hareini Arusech, I am your husband, or you are not or I am not your husband anymore. In the case of divorce, that doesn't work. So you're right, we don't need Shmuel to teach me that Hareya Mekudesha Li works. We need him to teach me that if I say, I am your husband, as opposed to you are Mekudesh to me, Hareini Sheikh will not work. And when I say, I am no longer your husband, that will not work. That's what we need Shmuel for. But you're right, in Echanami, we don't need Shmuel to teach the first part of his teaching. He's just mentioning it, Agavorcha, he's mentioning it as an aside, once he's mentioning the second part, the things that don't work. Why doesn't it work? Hachaksiv ki yikach, velo sheyikach es atzmo. Because it says that I need to take her, Hareini at Mikudesha li, and not that I become your husband. V'hachaksiv vishalcha, I need to send her way, that you are free, you're no longer my wife. Not velo sheyishalech es atzmo, not that I am no longer your husband. That will not work, and therefore again, we're not learning, we don't need Shmuel for the ratio of his teaching, we need Shmuel for the safer of his teaching.